thinking I want to kind of introduce our theme for the coming year, 2015. And if you see in the banner behind me, our theme is home, just that one word, home. And I realized after I decided on that, that's just very wide open. I mean, you can go in a lot of different directions. And part of that is intentional. We want to look at, obviously, home has a lot of different ideas and a lot of different manifestations. Let's go with that word. That's going to bother me. What's the word when Jesus became flesh? Incarnations. Yes, thank you. There's a lot of different things that we can look at and say that's home. Sometimes when we say home, we're talking about a certain place, a certain location, property we're thinking about. Sometimes we're thinking about a building and a home, a structure that our minds go to when we think about home. Sometimes it's people that define what home is, or it's a family. Sometimes it's a church that you can think about as home. An organization you can kind of think of as your home. Some people think of their jobs or their office as their home. Maybe your classroom. Even gangs, I think one of the big reasons why gangs are so draw people in is because it's a home. It's a place where they feel like they fit in and where they're accepted. And I think that's one of the reasons that one of the draws of even of an organization like a gang, it's a place where you fit in. We're going to, as we think about home over the kind of throughout the year, but especially in the next month or two, we're going to think about it in 4 different ways. But I'm going to tell you about that as the weeks come, and I don't want to give that away yet. But we're going to think about home in 4 different kind of categories that I think all of the different ways we think about home fits into that. But as I was thinking about the word home, one of the things I like to do is go to my little Windows Media Library or Windows Media Player, and I just search for home. And it's unbelievable how many different songs. There are country songs about home. There are rock songs about home. I personally don't know, but I'm sure there are rap songs about home. There are Christian songs about home. There are secular songs about home. There are Christmas songs about home. I started to wonder, why musically? Why does that such a big concept? And then I started thinking, it's not just in the music. It seems like in the arts, there's something that captures our imagination when it comes to home. There's something poetically that speaks to us. I'm taking some courses on some of the classics, and you remember, have you heard of Homer? Kind of defines some of the genres that we talk about with epic and lyric and comic and drama, tragedy and all that stuff. Homer had 2 big works, his Iliad, and then what was his other one? The Odyssey. And the Odyssey is all about a man's journey home. So throughout stories, you watch movies, and so many of them have this thread of going home, coming home, missing home, dreaming about home. What is it? And we're going to talk about this later in the sermon. I think there's something that God has put in us that responds to this idea of home. I think there's a reason that we write songs about home. There's a reason we write stories about home. There's a reason that our imaginations are captured by this concept of home. But with such a wide open concept, just a one word, just wide open home, I want to give us, as we go into the 2015, I want to give you kind of a definition so that you know when we're talking about home, what are we talking about? What direction are we going as a church and thinking as a church in 2015? So that as you come each Sunday and you see this banner and this word home, where are we headed with that? What are we thinking with that word? So I want to give you a working definition. And by definition, a working definition is not an extensive. I didn't look up home in any dictionary because I didn't want to be influenced by Webster or any of his cronies about what the word home means. So we've come up just my own Duane Beach definition that hopefully will just help us when you see home and when we talk about home as a church. What are we talking about in our context. So the way we're going to define home, let's see. Home is going to be where you belong. So our definition for home is the place where you belong. Whether it's your house or your work or a gang or your school or a church, we're going to think about home by this simple definition: is home is the place where you belong. Which then obviously begs a really important question, right? Because if home is the place where you belong, then what is the question, if we're trying to figure out where our homes are, what is the question we should be asking? And I see it's already up on the screen. Where do I belong? Where do you belong? Where do you really fit in? Where can you go and say, I belong here? This is my place. That by definition for us is going to be home. Obviously, we want to find that in Scripture. And I think Hebrews 11 gives us an incredible answer to that question. Where do I belong? What is my home? The whole chapter, I don't know how familiar you are with the book of Hebrews, and then chapter 11 in particular. Chapter 11 is a famous chapter in this book. This book is written to Jewish people who have chosen to follow Jesus Christ. So, and that's really neat. I don't know how many, sometimes they're called Messianic Jews, so Jews who have already accepted their Messiah, or Christian Jews that you know, but it's a really neat combination of all of the Jewish tradition of the Old Testament connected with the Christianity of the New Testament. So Hebrews is largely written to Hebrew people, saying, don't go back to that old system. There's a lot of pressure and there was persecution to go back to sacrifices, to go back to temple worship. The whole book of Hebrews is telling about how Christ is better than any priest, and Christ's sacrifice is better than any other sacrifice. And then he gets to chapter 11 and talks about faith. So a lot of people call chapter 11 the faith chapter, or if you want to be a little bit corny, the Hall of Faith, because it kind of goes with the Hall of Fame. And it talks about a lot of different people who have lived by faith. So chapter 11 is one of the most famous chapters in the whole book of Hebrews. He goes and he highlights person after person who has lived by faith, and he starts out, by faith, by faith, by faith. And then in the middle of all these stories, and as you're reading your Bible personally, and maybe you've started a Bible reading plan for 2015, if not, I'd encourage you to do that. There's apps, if you like technology, there's apps that really help with that. The Bible app is one of them, oddly enough. And it'll give you a reading to do each day. As you're reading your Bible, pay attention to when the author is doing something over and over again, and then he stops doing that and does something different. That's supposed to grab your attention. As a reader, when you see a pattern and then an abnormality to the pattern, that abnormality says, pay attention to me. This is important. I'm trying to draw your attention to this. So they didn't underline, they didn't have bold, they didn't make it a different color in the text. They did it through literature and through literature devices, and one of those is breaking a pattern. So you got by faith in verse 3, and then by faith in verse 4, by faith Abel, verse 5, by faith Enoch, verse 7, by faith Noah, verse 8, by faith Abraham, verse 11, by faith Sarah. Then verse 13, the pattern is broken, and it's going to be picked up again in verse 17. By faith Abraham, by faith Isaac, by faith Jacob, by faith Joseph, by faith Moses. But 13 to 16 are different, which tells us, pay attention, look at these. So let's look at them together. He's gone through some of the patriarchs, some of the early people who followed God. Verse 13 says, these all died in faith, not having received the promises. It kind of seems like he's telling you beforehand, these were all failures. God didn't keep his promise to any of these people. And then you go to the end of the chapter, and he says, in fact, all of these people didn't receive the promises that God had promised them. Which, from a secular, non-faith perspective, would kind of say, well, then what in the world do I want with this faith stuff if it doesn't work? If you believe in something and God promises you something and you don't get what God promises you, you die without the promises, then what good is it? And that's the human eye perspective. All through chapter 11, if you read it maybe after church, look for this pattern of what people see and what people cannot see. I really believe the author is contrasting human vision is what we live by. Faith is spiritual vision. Faith is being able to see something that your human eyes can't see. So do you live by what your human physical eyes see, or do you live by what your faith eyes can see? And he shows person after person who has spiritual vision to see something that no one else, that the people around them can't see. So he starts verse 13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. So they didn't receive them while they were alive, but they saw them. And having seen them afar off, they were assured of them, which takes you right back to verse 1. What is faith all about? Faith is the substance of things hoped for, and it's the evidence, it's the assurance of things that you can't see. It's the definition of what faith is being able to see what you can't see. Faith is being able to see what you can't see. And so he says, these all died in faith. They didn't receive the promises, but they saw the promises, and they were assured of the promises. And being assured of the promises, I've got the New King James, and it says they embraced them. I think some others say they welcomed them. This Greek word, as I was studying this passage, it's a Greek word that means you longingly anticipate something. You look forward to something. One commentator even said there was a certain greeting that they would have as they came back home on the boats, back to their home country, and as they would wave to their people waiting for them. That kind of a picture of seeing something far off and waving and saying, I'm coming home. I'm almost there. It says that they didn't receive the promises, but they saw them. They were convinced of them by faith, and they embraced them. They longed for them. They looked forward to them. And then that leads us into this next phrase. Because they saw them, because they were sure of them, and because they looked forward to them, their vision of those promises made them feel like strangers and pilgrims where they were at the time, which happened to be where? On the earth. It says, because they were looking at the promises, because they were convinced of the promises, because they were anticipating and longing for the promises, they said, when I'm here, I'm a stranger. I'm a pilgrim. So this is kind of how I want you to write this down. These men and women of faith claim to be foreigners and pilgrims on the earth. Isn't it funny how many different words we have for someone who doesn't belong? So remember, what's the definition? Our definition of home is where you belong. And we make sure to categorize those who are somewhere they don't belong. Foreigners, aliens, immigrants. German, what's the German word? Auslander, or maybe you've heard this one, Ami. You are all Amis, which is short for Americanos. And Ami is kind of it's a nickname, and there's some sweetness to it, but there's also a recognition that you are somewhere you don't belong. And as cultures, we do this. We label people who are somewhere they don't belong as an outsider, a foreigner, an alien, an immigrant, an Auslander. And these men and women of faith looked around at earth and they said, I am somewhere I don't belong. I am a foreigner here. I'm a stranger here. I'm a pilgrim here. And because they were looking at the promises, because they were sure of the promises, because they longed for the promises, he goes on to say, those who say such things, in verse 14, those who say that they're pilgrims and strangers, They declare plainly that they seek a homeland. They're looking for their home. They're on their odyssey to go home. They seek a homeland. But then he wants to make sure you understand it's not just that they're in the wrong place, they're in the wrong country, or they're in the wrong neighborhood, or they're in the wrong fort or base or station. He says it's not that just that they found themselves at the wrong place on earth and they wanted to go back to their home place on earth, which maybe you feel like that in Germany. I feel like a foreigner here, but if I can go back to the place I was born and raised, then I'm home again. He's saying that's not the situation. It's not just they were at the wrong place on earth. There was no place on earth that they were at home. If they wanted to go back home, they could have gone back home, but what they found was every place they went to was not home. And so they say that they seek a homeland. If they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. Verse 16, but now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. They desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. And I want to just stop for a second here. It would not be hard for me to say, does anybody else want a better place to live? I mean, that's an easy one, right? All of us could think of, yeah, it'd be nice to move somewhere, to live somewhere. Let's call it heaven. It'd be nice to live in a heaven where things go the way I want them to go, where everyone does what I want them to do, where I get everything that makes me happy. And I feel like sometimes that's the way we present heaven, is if you're having a hard time here on earth, there's a place where everything you like, everything that makes you happy, you get to go there. And then everyone says, well, gee, I'd like to go there. Especially if we present the opposite of hell is where for eternity you're punished and separated from God. And the picture of fire helps us to see what kind of torment hell is going to be about. So it's this place where you get whatever you want or where you suffer and torment. And that's not at all the picture of what the author is describing these people, men and women of faith. They're saying, I want the promises that God has given to me, not about me. Heaven isn't about your fantasies. It's not about your pleasure. It's not about you getting what you want. Heaven is all about God. Heaven is centered around God. And those who go to heaven, see? God said amen. Those who go to heaven go there because God is the center of it. They don't go there to find a place where they're the center of it. That's what makes earth such a terrible place to live, is because we've got so many people who are trying to make earth the center of their lives. I didn't know I was going to say all that. Okay, so they claim to be foreigners and pilgrims on the earth, and they were seeking a heavenly home. They were seeking a homeland where God was the center. Then, would you look at that last phrase, the last sentence, verse 16? Therefore, another corny little Bible trick. Whenever you see a therefore, you got to ask what the therefore is there for, right? Why? Why is God not ashamed? You go back, because they're looking for a homeland. Because they have seen the promises, they're convinced of the promises, and they long for the promises. And because they see themselves as pilgrims and strangers on earth, they don't find themselves at home anywhere. They're longing and looking for a home. Therefore, because of all of that, it says God is not ashamed to be called their God. I think that's a euphemism. A euphemism is where you say something very slightly to imply something a lot greater. I believe what the author is saying is God beams like a proud papa to see people who actually get it, to see people that have faith, that their eyes are open and they actually see reality. For God to communicate and to dwell with people who see him, who see what he's doing, and who long to be with him. When he says God is not ashamed to be called their God, I think really what he's saying is almost the opposite, that God is bursting with excitement, with pride over these children who are getting it, who are hearing him, who are seeing him, and who are living accordingly. And then he says one other thing. Not only is he not ashamed to be called their God, but he has prepared such a home for them. Which I think is beautiful. If you go back to that picture of someone on a boat nearing the shore and waving to shore saying, I'm almost home, I'm almost home. This boat is not my home. This boat is not where I belong. I am a pilgrim, but that's my home and I'm almost there. And then verse 16 says there's a father on that shore saying, I am your father, I am your God, and your home is ready for you. I have prepared a home for you. As a church, I can't think of a better description of where I want to take us in 2015 than to be people who confess that this earth, we're strangers and we're pilgrims. People who seek a homeland. And people who God is not ashamed to say, I am their God and I have prepared a place for them. I think that's about the epitome of a job well done as a Christian. For God to say, I am proud of you, you get it, and I've got a place waiting for you. So this is the other thing I want you to write down there. They got it, and God was waiting for them. I guess in a nutshell, that's my desire for 2015. For us to focus on our home. For us to be people who get it, who see it, whose eyes are opened by faith, so that we say, I understand where my home is, I understand where my home is not. Which goes back to our original question. Home is where you belong, so the question that we ought to be asking is, what? Where do we belong? Where do I belong? Where do you belong? Now, if we asked these men and women of faith, what is the author is saying, these men and women of faith, how would they answer that question? Where do you belong? First, they would answer it negatively. And he tells us that right in verse 13. They confessed. They said, I am a stranger and a pilgrim. The words stranger and pilgrim, by their very definition, mean you're not at home, right? That label says, I'm someone who is not where I belong. I'm someone who is not at home. So the first thing that faith says is, I do not belong to this earth. I said before, if we said, is anyone looking forward to a heavenly home? Probably everyone could agree with that, but I don't think you can actually biblically say that you're looking forward to a heavenly home until you settle this part. This is the first part, the heavenly home is the second part. You cannot actually be looking forward to a heavenly home until you resolve in your heart about this earth and whether it's your home. Faith says, I do not belong to this earth. Just think about the implications of that for a second. Remember we talked about how powerful, almost mystical a word home is, how much we long for it, we write stories about it, we sing about it. What is it about us that's drawn to this home, to this concept, this image of home? I don't think you will ever be biblically prepared for your heavenly home until you come to the point where you're a stranger and a pilgrim here on earth. The therefore says that. God welcomes them and has a home prepared for them because they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims. So let me just start to boil this down for you. What we're getting at here is there is no place on earth that really is a Christian's home. I love America, but America is not my home. I realize some of you, especially those of you from Texas, that's going to make you cringe a little bit. Texas is not your home. If you're from Bavaria, Bavaria is not your home. Do you see where it starts to cut? Because we basically want both and. We want to be at home here, and then when our time at home here is gone, we want to be at home there. But this passage is saying it's much more an either or than a both and. You're either at home here or you're at home there, but if you want to be at home in heaven, there's got to be a spiritual discontentment in your life. And usually we talk about contentment, and I believe so strongly in the importance of contentment. But spiritually, there ought to be something in you that itches for something, that longs for something. And I absolutely believe that God has put that in every single person. Ecclesiastes, and it's a strange verse, but it says that God has set eternity in the hearts of people, of men. That God has put in us something that longs for something that we can never actually meet or find here on earth. This, which speaks to our fascination with home. I think one of the reasons we sing about it, one of the reasons we write stories about it, one of the reasons we dream about it and have memories of home and apple pie and holidays and the charm and the magic of home is that God has put something in us to say, you are not at home yet. And we long for it, and we want it, and we seek it. And we think that it's about holidays and snow falling and Christmas lights and baked goods, at least for me. Baked goods are a very important part of the whole picture. And we say, that's home. That's what will meet this craving and this desire in my heart is the holidays. And then we live through the holidays and we somehow think there's something missing. This isn't it. And we think, okay, it's a new house. It's a house with a yard and a picket fence, and that's home, and that's going to somehow itch this craving in my heart. And we create that, and that's not it. We go after it, and that's not it. And we seek it, and we seek it, and we seek it, and we write music about it, and we write stories about it because we know that there's something wrong with every home we go to. There's something missing in every home we create. A lot of this isn't original to me. On the back of this, I put a quote from one of C.S. Lewis's sermons that he shared. On the bottom, I put the information where you can find it. It's $1.99. Let me tell you, just the name of the book is Weight of Glory, which is a collection of a couple of his sermons. Weight of Glory, just the first one by itself is worth $10. So spending $1.99, let me encourage you, if you read on Kindle, it's a great deal. I'm going to try to jump in. I hope some of this makes sense. It's hard sometimes to pull one section of a talk out and miss all the rest. It says, in speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, talking about exactly what we're talking about, this desire for home, which we find in ourselves even now. I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you. That's that spiritual discontentment that I'm talking about. This feeling like nothing ever quite meets my expectations. There's always something about home that's missing. This inconsolable secret. The secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia, and romanticism, and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversations the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. I love this. The secret we cannot hide and the secret we cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it's a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it, and we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. That's beautiful. Our commonest expedience is to call it beauty and behave as if that settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedience was to identify it with certain moments in his own past, but all of this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. So what C.S. Lewis is saying is we have these places where something hits us and we say, this is good and this is beautiful. This speaks to my heart. And the temptation is to make that the thing that we crave. So our memories of Christmas and lights and baked goods, it speaks to us. And we know that there's something home about that. And the danger is to say, that's home. That's what I long for. That's what I've always been wanting. C.S. Lewis is saying that's not what you've always been wanting. That's just a whisper of what you crave and what you long for. That's a whisper of this inconsolable secret inside of you that no home will ever meet. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire, but if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols. Not dumb kids like stupid, which is another bad word that you shouldn't say, but dumb like mute. Idols that can't do anything for you. Breaking the hearts of their worshipers, for they are not the thing itself. America is not home. Your dream house is not home. Your dream assignment is not home. There's no church that can meet this home, this craving that you have, the longing that you have. They are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found. Again, this is beautiful writing. The echo of a tune we have not heard. News from a country we have never yet visited. And then he knows he's getting kind of mystical, and so he says, do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am. And C.S. Lewis is the one who wrote Narnia and Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and all of those children's books. He was very much into fairy tales. But he says, perhaps I am, but please remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on this earth. So C.S. Lewis is saying, everything around you is telling you, this is home, this is home, this is home, this is home. And he's trying to wake you up, and I'm trying to wake you up, and Hebrews is trying to wake you up and say, this is not our home. As Christians, we do not belong here. The eyes of faith say, I do not belong to this earth. Which changes every home you have. No longer becomes the thing you long for and crave for. Your country citizenship, the beautiful brick house, the membership in a community and in a club, even your church involvement is not the thing that meets your deepest need. That craving has been given to you, that longing has been given to you by God to say, there's something else that I want. There's something else that I need. Faith says, I do not belong to this earth. Look at 15 and 16. It says, I belong in heaven. I'm seeking a heavenly home. I'm seeking to be where my God is. And if we say, I belong in heaven, then we've answered the question, right? Because home is where we belong. And if we belong in heaven, then the very last one, heaven is my home. In 4 words, that is my goal for 2015. There's all sorts of pictures and ideas that probably shoot in your mind when you see the word home. And when someone asks you, what does home mean to you? For me, so often I would start talking about the place where I live with my family because there are so many sweet memories there. What C.S. Lewis is telling us is that is not our home. That's not our ultimate home. Those sweet memories are not ultimately satisfactory. They're not enough. They're just whispers of what we really are longing for, what is really calling out to us. And if you make the home where you live with the people you love your home, if you put your heart there and say, that's going to meet my longings, you're going to end up disappointed because your spouse cannot meet the needs of your heart. Your children cannot meet the needs of your heart. And as good as my wife cooks, her food cannot meet the needs of my heart. There's something more that we're called to. Let me just say as we close, I have heaven is my home. And in that context, we're talking about the eyes of faith. Say, heaven is my home. Hebrews, one of the main purposes of the book is to warn us about turning away from faith, about rejecting faith. In chapter 9, 11 to 14, it says, "But Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with a greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is not of this creation. Christ came not with the blood of goats and calves." You remember that's what they sacrificed in the Old Testament? "But Christ came with his own blood, and he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption." He says, if the blood of bulls and rams, if those worked to wash away sin temporarily, how much more does the blood of Jesus Christ that is offered in the real tabernacle wash us clean forever? And that's the offer of faith. Faith sees Christ. Faith sees his sacrifice. Faith sees Christ's blood shed for us. And it accepts that. It puts its trust in that. But Hebrews is also filled with warnings. It starts right in the very beginning of the book in chapter 2. Chapter 2, he says, "How shall we escape? If we neglect so great a salvation, how shall we escape?" If Christ has shed his own blood for us and gone to God in our place, and we neglect that, how are we going to escape God's wrath, God's anger? In chapter 9, he talks about it. Where was it? And then chapter 12. If you're in chapter 11, just turn over to chapter 12 with me. Chapter 12, 25 says, "See that you do not refuse him who speaks." God offers salvation through Jesus Christ, through a better high priest, offering a better sacrifice and a better tabernacle and a better temple. And this offer is given to you, and now the author of Hebrews is saying, do not reject God's offer of grace. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, in other words, God repeatedly judged people who refused him on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised, saying, "Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven." Now this, "yet once more," indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Can you look at verse 28? "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. I do not want you to walk away this morning saying, heaven is my home. Yippee. If you have not accepted the grace and the gift of Jesus Christ. Over and over in Hebrews, the warning is, if you reject Jesus Christ, there is no other salvation available. God has not come up with a plan B. God has not come up with a second option. Jesus Christ is the best high priest offering the best sacrifice in the best place for your salvation. In chapter 2 he says, how are we going to escape? How will you escape? If you reject that, and then you come before God and say, God, I didn't accept Christ, but can we work out another deal? There is no other deal. There is no other way. There is no other name. There is no other salvation. Hebrews chapter 12, he says, see that you do not refuse him who speaks. See that you do not reject the one who has given his blood for you. Because after that God, after the loving God that displays himself in the crucifixion, what you're left to deal with is a God who is a consuming fire. Those are your options. You've got the grace and love of Jesus Christ, or you've got God, a consuming fire, to face. Do not refuse the love and the grace of God in Jesus Christ.